Get ready for Benjamin Knight Fuchs live here on a Sunday evening. Ben, how are you?
What's up? Nice to see you, Liam.
Nice to see you, Ben.
Missed you last week.
Yeah.
Just helping out my mom.
How's your mom doing?
Well, she's 90. She's hanging in there for 90. Her body's falling apart, but she's got energy. And I started giving her Beyond Tangy Tangerine about 6 months ago. And I'll tell you what, makes a significant difference. I don't know if we talked about this before, but the more deficient your body is, the faster it absorbs nutrients.
Wow.
So, isn't that cool? So
that's
the more
very
you need them,
cool.
right? The more you need them, the more your body will. It's sort of like a dry sponge sucks up more water than a wet sponge. The more you need nutrients, the drier your body is, like a sponge is devoid of water, the faster the nutrients get absorbed. It's really one of the cool things about the body. And also, by the way, the sicker we are, the faster we turn it around.
The sicker we are, the faster we turn it around. It's counterintuitive. You would think that.
I didn't say the longer. I didn't say you turn around. I didn't say the faster you eliminate it. I said the faster you turn it around, begin the process. And I'll tell you why that is in a second.
Okay.
Before I tell you that, check this out. And this is a well-known phenomenon. I'm sure you've seen this and heard this. The more weight you need to lose, the faster it comes off. It's the last 10 pounds that are the hardest.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
The first 40 or 50 pounds is much easier than the last 10 pounds.
Sure.
So it's like the more out of balance the body is, the more it's ready to go back into balance. This is a kind of a natural physics phenomenon. The more out of balance a system is, the quicker it is to start. Once you make the changes, of course, once you make the appropriate changes to restore the system back to balance, the faster it'll happen. So if you have multiple health challenges and you figure out, you backtrack, which is what we're always doing on this program. What I always do is backtrack, troubleshoot. I want people to see how the disease progresses so that you can reverse it. Once you backtrack it, once you see how the symptoms, and the more symptoms you have, the better it is, how the symptom are related to one cause, all you gotta do is cut the head off the snake. All you gotta do is just get right down to the cause, and then everything just falls into place. Now, it takes some time. Sometimes it may take a lifetime. If you've been mucked up for 50 years, and now you're 60 and want to make a change,
Sure.
It may take you 20 years. It may take you 10 years. Sure. But you can begin the process today, this moment, right away. As soon as you take the stressors out of the system. See, the system's in a balance. Basically, this is what disease is. You have a balance, and the body is in this exquisite balance. And I'm saying a balance, but it's much more complex than that because every cell has a balance, and it's balances within balances within balances within balances, almost an infinite amount of nested balances, like those Russian dolls. You ever see those Russian dolls where you have a doll, and then you take it out, there's another doll, and another doll, and another doll, and another doll? These are nested phenomena. Russian dolls are an example of nesting, where you keep going down and down and down. And the same thing with the stressors in the body that throw the body out of balance. You have cellular stresses, then you have pathway stresses in the pathways, in the biochemical pathways, and you have genetic stressors. So you can keep going all the way down. But the point is once you start to resolve the stressors, and you only have to do a couple things. That's what I'm always talking about. We're going to talk about it here today. Once you resolve a couple of things, really only 2 or 3 things, that's like cutting the head off the snake. And everything, the snake then dies. Everything else falls into place. Now, this reminds me of a story of the Gordian Knot. Have you ever heard the story?
No, I've heard of the Gordian, but I don't know the story.
Let me tell you the story. It's a cool story. So Alexander the Great, he was one of the greatest figures in all of history, really. Certainly one of the greatest conquerors, I guess, or emperors, whatever he was, generals. And he was, he died when he was 33.
Right. Yeah.
He died very young. And he was trained by, I think it was Aristotle, I think, trained him. Was it Aristotle? Yeah, it was Aristotle trained him. He's trained by one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived. And he was the son of a king. And just this phenomenal figure. You know how he died? It's funny, when he died, there's a famous quote he said when he died. He goes, "I am dying by the hand of too many doctors." He said that in like 300 BC.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
I'm dying at the hand of too many
doctors.
Yeah, I don't mean to rip on doctors, but it's just funny how, this whole thing with medicine and with doctoring and the unsavory reputation of the medical model, which in fairness, they do great things. I don't like ripping on doctors, but it's just funny that he said that. Anyway, he was he was riding through this place called Gordia.
Mm-hmm.
It was a region or a country or state, and there was a knot on the tree. And Alexander says, "What is this knot doing on the tree?" And one of his generals says, "Well, Alexander, there's a legend that says that whoever can get rid of this knot on the tree will be the emperor of Gordia." And Alexander says, "That doesn't sound hard." He says, "No, it is hard. There have been people who have been trying to untangle this knot for 100 years, and nobody can figure out how to do this thing. So it's not that easy." And Alexander the Great, trained by Aristotle, he takes his knife, boom, cuts the knot. He says, "I'm king of Gordia." Just like that. That's called the Gordian Knot.
Okay. All right.
You're worried around tangling and untangling, and you just, boom, you slice the knot. That's how you do it. And that's how you get to the root of disease. You slice it, you cut it, you get to the Gordian Knot. You don't have to need to know about all the different molecular pathways that are affected and different cytokines and inflammatory factors and, the genetic modifications and all. You don't know any of that stuff. You cut the head off a snake, you cut the Gordian Knot. And that's what we always talk about when we talk about the triangle of disease. The triangle of disease represents, or addressing the triangle of disease represents cutting the Gordian Knot. You just get right down to it. And it's very simple to do, but not easy to do. Right? It's simple in the sense that all you do is a couple things. It's not easy in the sense that
you got to do them.
You got to do them, right? And we don't like doing them. We got to change our lives. And because the major stressor or disturber, that's the right word, the major thing that perturbs or disturbs the homeostasis, the balance inside the body, is food. It always boils down to that. Always boils down to that. Either food in its macroscopic sense, protein, fats, carbohydrates, or in its metabolic sense in terms of the energy it contains. See, food is two things. It's the big parts, the protein, the fats, and the carbohydrates, and the fiber and whatever nutrients are in there, etc. And then it's the pure energy. Those are two ways that the body has to process food. First, it has to process the proteins and the fats and the carbohydrates and all the components of the food.
Okay.
But then it has to deal with the energy that's derived from the food. The body immediately turns that stuff into energy. Not immediately, but it processes that stuff into energy. And so you got two disturbances here. Does it make sense? You follow me here?
Yes, absolutely.
You got a system that's closed, and in a closed system, the momentum is always the same. The processes stay the same in a closed system, but we have two openings. And these openings are the skin a little bit. We have one major opening. The skin has become more of an important opening now that we're sticking things into the blood through the skin. So now in the last 100 years, 50 years, certainly in the last few years, we've been obsessed with sticking things into our skin, into our blood, which I'm not allowed to talk about here.
Right. Wink, wink. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
In order to cure ourselves of things. So the skin has become more relevant, but for the most part, the main entrance of this stuff that throws the body off is the intestine into the blood. That's why it's the first point on the triangle of disease. And the second point on the triangle of disease is the blood sugar system, which is the energy system. The foundation of the triangle of disease, and I call it the triangle because the thyroid is the jumping off point, but you just really got to work on the 2 points at the bottom, which are the digestive system and the blood sugar system. And it makes sense because these are the places where the balance gets thrown off energetically, and in terms of the energy that enters into the system, and then in terms of the big components, the proteins and the fats and the carbohydrates.
So you take care of the blood sugar, take care of the digestion, and it will reflect into the adrenal complex.
It will ultimately show up because the main cause of stress on the adrenal glands is metabolism.
Okay.
So yeah, you can do things for the adrenal glands specifically. So you can use certain nutrients for the adrenal glands. You can use psychological strategies because there's a very important role for psychology in terms of adrenal health, stress health. So the human being's ability to imagine things. Animals don't imagine a future. They don't worry. We human beings imagine the future because of our minds. We have an ability to think about the past and think about the future. And this accounts for stresses that don't exist, right? Animals don't have stresses that don't exist. We have imaginary stresses. So there's an important connection, and that's a good thing. It allows us to predict, in order to make good judgments for survival. So it has an evolutionary purpose, but we've messed it up. So that's why there's an important relationship between how you think. And there's a phenomena, there's a school of health, or a specialty is the word I'm looking for, called psychoneuroimmunology. Okay. Psychoneuroimmunology is the connection between your psyche and your neurology and your immune system. Psychoneuroimmunology. There's psychodermatology as well. And that's the relationship between the psyche and the skin. There's psychodermoimmunology, which is the relationship between your skin and inflammation and your psyche. So we're starting to understand there's an important connection between mind and body. So there's things you could do with the adrenal glands. There's nothing you can do with the thyroid. And the adrenal glands are also, making sex hormones. And sex hormones are your stress hormones, your anti-stress hormones, your growth hormones, your fertility hormones, your youth hormones, your life hormones. And that's all at the level of the adrenal glands. And once that's whacked out, it's a short jump to hypothyroidism, which of course is also related to the digestive system. And that's where the triangle comes from. But if you want to just be simple, boom, boom, digestion, blood sugar. And that's what we're going to talk about here today. Because I had a conversation with a friend of mine, a friend of a friend of mine. She wanted me to help this gal who had psoriasis. And I spent some time with her this morning. I thought that'd be an interesting subject to talk about.
The heartbreak of psoriasis.
Heartbreak of psoriasis. You remember that? The heartbreak. That's because we're old. They don't say that anymore. The heartbreak of psoriasis. Me and you. I think that was a commercial.
Right.
Anyway, so psoriasis affects about 3% of adults in the United States. So I don't know, what does that come out to? About 15 million people, something like that. Is that
sure.
right? From my math, something along those lines. 10, 15 million people. And they classify them into these different states: inverse psoriasis and pustular psoriasis and plaque psoriasis. Plaque psoriasis is the most common type of psoriasis, but they're all autoimmune diseases. Whenever you have an autoimmune disease, the mechanism involves toxicity getting into the blood. All disease is cell disease, but all cell disease begins at the level of the blood, because it's the blood that feeds the cells. It's the blood that detoxifies the cells. It's the blood that breathes the cells. It electrifies the cells. The blood is the womb, the matrix that feeds the cells. The blood, and also the more traditional type of connective tissue. I don't say that's not the right word. When we think of connective tissue, we don't think of the blood. The blood is connective tissue. It's liquid connective tissue.
Okay.
It's liquid connective tissue. So the connective tissue complex includes the blood, but it also includes collagen and hyaluronic acid, and it's the connective tissue that feeds everything. When we have an autoimmune disease, the connective tissue is toxic. With any disease, the connective tissue is toxic, but autoimmunity is one of the more common results of toxicity in the system. And if you go to the medical model, they don't do anything. They can't do anything because they don't know what I just told you. They do know it, but they haven't connected the dots. The strategy at the level of the medical model, the healthcare professionals, the dermatologists and the immunologists, is to shoot down the immune system. And they used to shoot down the immune system at the fundamental level of the adrenal glands with cortisol or prednisone. Prednisone is an immune suppressant. It was a really horrible drug, but if you have an autoimmune disease, it could be miraculous, at least at first. Now they have more sophisticated ways of shutting down the immune system, literally by shooting heat-seeking missiles at the literal biochemical missiles that are nano-sized.
Wow.
What they call monoclonal antibodies.
Okay, I've heard of that. Okay.
Right? They take antibodies, which are things that the body makes to fight bacteria and parasites and bad guys, and they genetically create them. And instead of having the antibodies go for a bacteria, they have the antibodies go for the immune system, for specific molecules of the immune system. They shoot them down. Those are technically, they refer to those biologics. You may have heard that term, biologics. They're the most expensive drugs. It cost you $10,000 a month for these things. And these are these are the ones you see on advertised a lot. They want you on these biologics. They make so much money on the biologics. And so all of the commercials, the one that gets me, the Jardians, where the lady there's like a Broadway play, and there's some kind of theatrical presentation. I don't know where you went there, Liam. There's this kind of like theatrical presentation to try to get you to do. I think it's Jardians. It's Jardians. So there's a ton are super well produced, and they're always bungee jumping, and they're jumping out of airplanes. Let me get you back on here, Liam. They're like jumping out of airplanes, and they're gardening, and they're, doing all these extreme sports, and they got psoriasis, or they got heart disease, or they got kidney disease, or whatever it is. And they're using these biologics to get rid of them. Biologics are anti-inflammatories in the sense that they suppress the immune system. Okay. So what we're talking about here is suppressing the immune system, not suppressing it, but just telling it just so it's not necessary, making it not unnecessary by eliminating the triggers of the immune system. Listen, this is logical. This is logical. These are immune diseases, autoimmune diseases. Psoriasis is an autoimmune disease that affects the skin cells. But it could be multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disease that affects the nerves. Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disease that affects the thyroid. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease that affects the pancreas. Rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune disease that affects the cartilage. Scleroderma is a you know what I'm saying here? Lupus,
sure, yeah.
Scleroderma, they're autoimmune diseases that affect various parts of the body. But the part itself isn't as important as the fact that something's being attacked. And that always comes in through toxicity in the blood, into the blood. First and foremost, our first point in the triangle of disease, pop her up there, my friend. Skin and gut microbiome in psoriasis. This is from Frontiers in Microbiology. There is much evidence that alterations in the skin and intestinal microbiome play an important role in the pathogenesis of psoriasis, and restoration of the microbiome is a preventative and therapeutic strategy for psoriasis. Hello, that's the microbiome. Now, we talk about the intestine as being the first point on the triangle of disease, but intestinal disease begins as dysbiosis, messed up gut bacteria. So we talk about the intestine, but really the beginnings of the chronic disease process begin at the level of the gut microbiome. Always, 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 always. And this is where SIBO comes in, and we haven't talked about SIBO, but I think we'll do that next time because that's really important. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Always the level of the microbiome. And there's many ways to address that. We'll talk about that here in a moment. So that's the first point on the triangle of disease. What's the second point on the triangle of disease? Boom, the blood sugar system. Next slide. This is from diabetes, the journal Diabetes, Metabolic Syndrome and Obesity, Targets and Therapy. Diabetes and psoriasis are prevalent conditions with a spectrum of serious adverse outcomes. Both diseases are common comorbidities for each other. They occur together. And diabetes is considered a risk factor for psoriasis and vice versa. Second point on the triangle of disease. Psoriasis is a blood sugar problem. Look, notice we haven't said anything about the skin here. Most people with psoriasis are going to go to a skin health professional. Psoriasis is an autoimmune disease. It's not a skin disease, even though it shows up on the skin. And by that, I mean you can't get to the psoriasis by treating the skin. You have to get inside the body at the causal level. Point number one on the triangle is the digestive system. The next point is the blood sugar system. One more, the third slide here. We know that one of the outcomes of long-term disturbances in the blood sugar system is something called metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is a constellation of disease states or symptoms. That's what a syndrome is, that involves metabolism. What's metabolism? Everything. I call it everything syndrome. It could be everything. It could be your liver. It could be your bones. It could be your brain. It could be your immune system. It could be your cardiovascular system. It could cause obesity. It could cause cancer. It can cause acne. It can cause liver disease. It's endless what it can do because you're working with the energy part of the body, and everything, every cell in the body, every organ in the body requires and is responsive to fluctuations in energy. Next slide. And then you have the thyroid connection. I meant to put, we've probably got these a little backwards, but we'll talk about the thyroid here. Hypothyroidism is the jumping off point to all chronic degenerative disease. And if you have a chronic degenerative disease, you got a thyroid problem. You don't even need to be tested. You got a thyroid problem. Now, the problem with the thyroid is, number one, it's the jumping off point to all other health challenges because it's the major regulator of all the cells. Thyroid hormone makes skin cells skin, bone cells bone, muscle cells muscle, heart cells heart, kidney cells kidney, intestinal cells intestine. A cell does what it's supposed to do under the control of thyroid hormone. So once you're hypothyroid, you are off to the disease races. And if you have a long-term chronic degenerative disease, you can assume that there's some kind of thyroid dysfunction that's associated with it, but you can't do anything about the thyroid on its own directly, with the exception of giving thyroid hormone. And anybody who's got Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is the major form of hypothyroidism, it's an autoimmune disease of the thyroid, you know that you get Synthroid or levothyroxine or something similar to that, or maybe Armour Thyroid if you go to a more holistically minded physician. And all that does is replace thyroid hormone. That doesn't make your gland better. That doesn't make the organ better, because there's nothing you could do to make the organ function better, because the organ functions because of what's happening at the level of the adrenals and the blood sugar system and the digestive system. I hope this isn't too confusing here. Liam, help me out. I got to let John hear.
Not at all. Not at all. It's
right.
it's awesome.
Point. But before you get there, next slide. Kind of reverse these a little bit. Cortisol and stress reactivity. Psychological, this is from Clinical and Laboratory Investigations, which is part of the British Journal of Dermatology. Psychological stressors might contribute to the severity of chronic inflammatory diseases such as psoriasis by dysregulating what they call the HPA axis, which is the brain-adrenal connection. Conclusions. Daily stressors influence disease outcome in patients with psoriasis by affecting cortisol levels at moments of high stress. Furthermore, patients with persistently high levels of stressors seem to have a specific psychological profile of lower cortisol levels and may be particularly vulnerable to stressors. So over time, as your body loses its responsiveness or doesn't make as much cortisol, cortisol is an anti-inflammatory, lower levels of cortisol, which are associated with psychological stress, will have a pro-psoriasis effect. Cortisol is an anti-inflammatory, and it has a quenching effect or an inhibiting effect in the immune system. Without enough cortisol, you end up with inflammatory problems, and as it turns out, patients who have lower levels of cortisol or disturbances in their cortisol are also going to have problems with their with immune problems in general, and problems with the thyroid, and also problems with psoriasis. Next slide. Psychological stress and salivary cortisol levels in patients with plaque psoriasis. Psoriasis was associated with higher psychological stress, anxiety, and depressive symptoms, and impaired cortisol response to stress. All right, so what do you do about it? Well, of course, the first thing you got to do, because the first point in the triangle of disease is food, or the digestive system, is you work with food. Food diary, elimination diet. Notice that certain foods trigger flare-ups. Flare-ups are always your best friend. A flare-up tells you what you just did in real time. So as soon as you flare up, what did I do an hour ago, 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago? I don't mean just, but within the last 8 hours, 4 to 8 to 12 hours, and you notice patterns. This is where a food diary comes in, and this is where fasting, stopping cessation of food. Usually people with psoriasis will know that they have digestive issues, bloating, gas, constipation, heartburn, some kind of digestive symptom. When you fast, you'll notice those disappear. And when you start eating again, you'll notice they come back. And you keep track of that. It's called a food diary, and then you start eliminating foods. Secondly, next slide, Liam. Use probiotics and prebiotics. They call it novel therapeutic approaches because to them it's novel. This is the International Journal of Molecular Sciences from last year, from June 2023. They call it novel because to the medical model, probiotics are novel, but they're not novel to us. We've been using probiotics in the alternative health field and the nutritional health field since probiotics became a thing 25 years ago. And I learned about it in pharmacy school almost 40 years ago. That's pretty shocking right there. All right, so what does this say? Patients with psoriasis receiving anti-psoriatic local therapy and probiotic and prebiotic supplementation performed better in measures of disease activity, including various scores, than control groups, than patients not given those supplements. So probiotics, they're a little tricky. I like the Nightly Essence from Longevity. There are other probiotic supplements out there. I trust the longevity products in general, but the Nightly Essence I've had really good results with. So get yourself on the Nightly Essence. Use digestive enzymes, apple cider vinegar, bile salts, anything you could do for digestive health and to patch up a leaky gut. Vitamin A, by the way, is great for helping patch up a leaky gut, fucoidin. omega fatty acids, omega-3 essential fatty acids, particularly. Fried fats, on the other hand, can have a pro-inflammatory effect for folks who are dealing with leaky gut. Psoriasis tends to involve the fatty system of the body. So we'll find that probiotics are involved in helping the body process fats in the intestine, dietary fats. Probiotics actually make important not dietary, but metabolic fats for use. One in particular has a calming effect on the immune system. Next slide. Vitamin D is probably the quintessential anti-psoriatic nutrient. It's actually used in dermatology. It's used medicinally. Of course, it's used in a pharmaceutical form. There's a product that people apply topically, prescription product called Dovanex, which is a pharmacological or pharmaceutical version of vitamin D. But plain old vitamin D works, and even dermatologists will have sun lamps. And their psoriatic patients will just put their psoriasis plaques under the sun lamps. You can do that at home. Get yourself a sun lamp off Amazon if you have psoriasis and expose yourself to UV radiation from your sun lamp, or just get out in the sun. Vitamin D is extremely important for the immune system, for the digestive system, and as it turns out, it is the treatment of choice, the nutritional treatment of choice for psoriasis. You can't really, oral vitamin D is not a great way to get your vitamin D. The sun is the best way to get your vitamin D, or a sun lamp. You can eat vitamin D. It's found in certain foods. Organ meats are particularly good sources of vitamin D. And then mushrooms have some vitamin D in them. It's not really found in a lot of plants. It's not found in plants at all. It's an animal hormone. It comes from cholesterol, as it turns out, and plants don't really make cholesterol. Probably the best way to get your vitamin D. You can supplement with it also, of course, but the best way is going to be from the sun. Next slide. Vitamin E. Now, you'll notice that these vitamin D and vitamin E, and as we'll see here, some other fatty substances are linked, low levels are linked to psoriasis. Some of that might be intake, not getting enough vitamin E in your diet or through supplements, but a lot of it could also have to do with gut problems and gallbladder problems with bile. So it's not enough just to supplement. You got to work on the digestive element first. Nonetheless, these are supplements and nutrients that have been associated with whose low levels are associated with the condition, and supplementation may be helpful. Vitamin E is a guardian vitamin. It protects fats. One of the things that disturbs the immune system is disturbed or distorted fats. Distorted fats are pro-inflammatory. And fats in general, little pieces of fats, they call them lipid mediators. These are molecules that aspirin works on, and Tylenol works on, and Motrin works on. These molecules are associated with the inflammatory process, and vitamin E protects against their formation. Vitamin D is really interesting vitamin. It's a protective vitamin. It's not really involved in any metabolic pathways or making anything. It's more like a guardian, especially guardian for cells. And vitamin E has got really, really interesting roles to play in the skin. Here's a little tip for you. If you get a burn or you get some kind of a severe cut or trauma, high doses of vitamin E can help accelerate the healing dramatically. And I suppose I should probably tell you about the doses on some of these nutrients. You want about 400 IU a day of vitamin E, sunshine, vitamin D, and then probiotics are also, it's hard to measure them, but 10 billion to 20 billion units a day is probably a good place to at least start. So there's some supplements that have 50 billion units. So vitamin E protects the outside parts of cells, and it protects against the formation of these lipid mediators, and you want about 400 or so IU a day. Zinc, omega-3 fatty acids, next slide. They're your anti-inflammatory fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids are harder to find than omega-6 fatty acids, but that's not to say that omega-6 fatty acids don't have a role to play, a very important role to play, even an outsized role to play when it comes to the balance of omega-6s to omega-3s. Omega-6s are said to be pro-inflammatory, which is true, and omega-3s are said to be anti-inflammatory, which is true, but you got to have both. You got to have the pro-inflammatory and the anti-inflammatory. There's a balance. The problem with omega-6s is the distorted omega-6s, the cooked omega-6s, the processed omega-6s, and the out-of-balance omega-6s relative to the omega-3s. So omega-6s are very important. They're the most common form of essential fatty acid in your body, but omega-3s play an important role in balancing the omega-6s. And if you're out of balance at the level of omega-6s, which most of us are, Omega-3s can be very, very helpful, especially if you're dealing with an inflammatory condition, especially a skin inflammatory condition. And omega-3s are very calming for skin conditions, all skin conditions that are inflammatory. And that includes eczemas and dermatitises and rashes of all kinds, and dry skin, and also psoriasis. And then you come to the minerals. A couple of very important minerals are involved in the fatty system, or involved in fat processing, or are dependent on fat processing. And that's copper and zinc, particularly. Zinc and copper live in balance. If you're getting copper, and a lot of people are getting more copper than zinc, that can cause zinc deficiencies. Copper and zinc kind of balance each other out. So if you're getting more copper than zinc, you may end up with with a relative zinc deficiency. There's a really interesting balance between zinc and copper. So you kind of want to keep the two together, maybe 6 milligrams or so, something like copper glycinate, balanced out with maybe 50 milligrams of zinc. I like zinc picolinate. And a lot of people are already getting copper in the form of copper water, copper from copper pipes in water, particularly if you live in a big city. So zinc deficiency is really a problem, especially relative to the excess amount of copper, extra copper that a lot of people are getting. On the other hand, copper is a really valuable nutritional supplement, especially for the connective tissue. Selenium is also very important. Next slide. Selenium is another one of these fatty nutrients. And by the way, zinc is actually used to treat skin conditions in the form of zinc pyrithione, which is found in Head and Shoulders. Head and Shoulders shampoo, the active ingredient is zinc. And then Selsun Blue, the active ingredient is selenium. And so you can see even in the mainstream, they recognize, at least over the counter anyway, the relationship between zinc and healthy skin and selenium and healthy skin. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that both zinc and selenium they require bile and a fully functioning fat absorption system, which if you don't have intestinal health or your gallbladder issues or pancreatic issues, etc., you can run into problems with both zinc deficiency and selenium deficiency. Selenium is just an awesome all-around, a wonderful trace mineral supplement for the immune system and for the thyroid and for the heart. It's involved in detoxification in the liver as part of the whole glutathione complex. It's just a fabulously valuable mineral, trace element that a lot of people are deficient in. Number one, because they're not eating enough selenium-containing foods, which are high-protein foods, and things like seafood, which especially high levels of selenium. And a lot of people are selenium deficient because selenium is not found in a lot of places in the earth, which means it's not going to be found in a lot of vegetables. Traditionally, the best sources of selenium are going to be nuts and seeds. Selenium is found in Brazil nuts. Brazil nuts have a reputation for being the densest food source of selenium, but these days you don't know about the soils. So a lot of people are running into issues that are associated with selenium deficiencies, including immune problems. Cold sores, for example, can be related to selenium deficiencies, and viral infections can be more common in people who have selenium deficiencies. And also psoriasis, as it turns out, is also associated with selenium deficiencies. So that was kind of a long-winded conversation. I didn't even scratch the surface, Liam, about nutrients that you could use for psoriasis, but vitamin A is, of course, really important topically as well as internally for psoriasis. There's also roles for other digestive support supplements like I-26, which we've talked about in the past, and maybe lecithin granules to support bile health. There's a lot of different things you could do, but that's kind of the Cliff Notes version on how to take care of psoriasis. And as I said earlier, if you have psoriasis, you should know that 4 to 8 weeks from now, that's cellular turnover time at the level of the skin, your psoriasis can be gone.
Well, what I think is really amazing about this discussion is, I had a friend in high school who had this horrible case of psoriasis, and she would rub just a cortisone cream on her skin. Yeah. And so what you're showing is that psoriasis is really about balance. We talked about zinc, selenium, vitamin A, D, omega-3s, all of these factors combine to make an imbalance. And it's like the psoriasis is almost like a warning signal saying, You don't need, more cortisone. You need a balanced diet, need a balanced way forward. So
yeah, it's like, if you understand that dis-ease is when the body's out of balance, you can see how there's an inherent problem with the medical strategies, with pharmacology, because pharmacology is not going to restore the balance. It's going to throw it even further out of balance.
right.
And even if you're hiding the symptoms, the out of balance part isn't being affected. It's almost like fraudulent. And in fact, if you were to go to a court and you were to say to the judge, here's the evidence, judge, it's doctored. Would that be a good thing, Liam?
That would not be a good thing.
Because to doctor something is to commit a fraud.
Right.
Right? And so and I don't mean to be insulting anybody, because like I've said this many times, I have a lot of friends who are doctors and they're great people and they want to help.
And they do wonderful things.
They do wonderful things. This is not a knock on individuals, but the idea of using pharmacology, which inherently is going to throw the body out of balance to treat a condition that's caused by the body being out of balance, you can see how there's a problem there. What we're talking about here is restoring the body back to balance. And that always starts with the major disturber of balance, which is the blood, things that are getting into the blood through the intestine, through the digestive system.
And what's so great about what you're showing here is there is really a change that's happening within the wellness space. I mean, you're showing there's just a flood of information. It's not just one study here, one study there. It's just this growing awareness of the things that you're talking about, balance and
well, it's about time, is what I say.
Yes, I agree. All right, everybody. So
Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching. Leave your questions and comments on the platform you're viewing us from. And so we spend another great Sunday together, and I hope we can see everybody again next time. All right, Ben, it was great.
Thanks, Liam. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for the presentation, and we'll see everybody next week. Take care.